people don't feel connected to anything in their lives. They don't feel like they have a goal. They don't feel like they have a meaning.
Yeah.
They don't feel like they have a sense of stability. That is really anxiety inducing. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot to worry about when you don't know where your life is going. You don't feel like you have any control in your life. You don't feel like there's anyone steering where your life is going. You don't feel like you have a purpose in life. Those are scary things to deal with.
Yeah.
And if a person has religion, that really provides all those things for them. You have a purpose in life. If you believe in God, maybe obviously people go through challenges, and that's part of God's plan. Nobody escapes suffering, nobody escapes challenges at some point in their life.
Right.
But if you truly believe that there's a God up there who's controlling world events, controlling your specific life events, and there is a plan, there is a reason why everything happens, there is someone watching out for you. And part of that is to believe that God loves you and cares about you.
Yeah.
If you believe that God is a mean, scary God who wants to punish you, that's another issue you have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
But if you really believe in the version of God that I believe we believe in,
Right.
which is a loving, caring God who wants what's best for you,
And as your father.
right, and is like your
Yeah.
father, doesn't mean there's no consequences, but is like your father,
Mm-hmm.
then that really, you can let a lot of the stress go because you know that somebody's driving the ship, someone's driving your life, and you have a goal and a purpose, and you know where you're going, you know what you're supposed to be doing. Getting
Totally.
there is a process, but at least you have a good starting point.
So feel me when I bring it, sing it loud. I'm from the loot and I'm proud. Run a mile for the cause. I'm right.
Hi, guys. It's your girl, Nechama, your favorite Jew from the Lou. Welcome back to my podcast. And one of my favorite things about my podcast is that I can travel super easy with all my equipment. So I'm actually in Columbus, Ohio right now for Hanukkah, visiting my brother, Moshe. For those of you who have been on this journey, I have two older brothers, and my oldest brother, Chaim, actually don't even remember what episode he was. It was earlier on. I'll link it below if anyone wants to listen. His video was lost, but now I have my brother Moshe, Rabbi Moshe Yachnes. So welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you, and thank you for letting us film in your home. So it's a big deal.
Okay,
Yeah.
my pleasure.
I didn't realize that you had also listened to podcasts. I know most of the ones that we had talked about are more like Jewish themed podcasts that you've listened to. A big question that people have asked me, Jewish and non-Jewish, when they hear the name of my podcast, Jew from the Lou, they're like, "Oh, is it like a Jewish podcast?" And I'm like, "No,
Yeah.
not really." Just because, like, I'm Jewish, I'm from St. Louis, I'm a Jew from the Lou. A lot of my opinions are swayed by like my Jewish upbringing, but I wanted it to be a space where I could interview anyone from all walks of life. But at the same time, that doesn't mean there isn't going to be episodes with Jewish guests where it's going to be more Jewish relevant topics.
Right.
So I was thinking we should talk about teaching, but then you're like, no, that's already been taken. Chaim did it.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I don't want to be Chaim's following act. That's for sure not what I want to do.
I think that's our both of our goals in life.
Right, for sure. Nothing against Chaim. I love Chaim and I look up to him in many ways, but
Yep.
yeah, I feel like I can give something more, unique twist. I'm sure teaching's been spoken about many times before, so I don't know if that's so exciting for the audience. Better
Yeah.
give them something a little more unique.
Well, I really like the twist that you said today, and I actually want to make this the title of this episode where it's going to be called The One Where Religion Becomes Relevant.
Okay.
I really like
I hope
that.
we can accomplish that goal.
I mean, I think it's an ongoing one, and I don't think we're gonna make everybody happy, but that's okay. I'm told you asked me if I was okay with controversial, which I am, very much so, just because this is our space. And if anyone wants to come listen, cool. But if they have anything to say, instead of being a little ninja warrior, just come on and be a guest and talk it out
Right.
with me,
Right. Controversy is attention. That's what I always believe. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think rolls right into how relevant it is that you teach like eighth grade and high school students, because that's definitely an age when I think a lot of people start to struggle with religion and finding their place in it.
for sure. Yeah, no, one of the reasons I always tell people that I love that age, and the reaction I usually get when I tell people I teach seventh and eighth grade boys is, wow, I can't believe you would ever want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I can definitely understand where they're coming from.
Yep.
It definitely is a challenging age. But what I enjoy about it is, like you're saying, that it really is the age where they start to turn their brains on, as I say,
Yeah.
or we try to get them to turn their brains on, and they start having their own opinions and becoming their own people.
Yeah.
And to be there for that process is sometimes challenging, often challenging, because at that age when they're starting to think for themselves, but don't yet have the maturity and the respect for authority to
Mm.
really have that come out in a good way, usually comes out in the form of rebellion and doing things they shouldn't be doing. But as long as you can hang on for that ride, it really could sometimes be exciting. And the things they say and the place you can meet them is really exciting sometimes.
And I'm sure they challenge you in your own faith and in your own beliefs and thoughts as well, because you have to be on it. You can't just be, you know, coasting through religion if you're teaching that age, because they'll see right through you.
Right, for sure. I definitely have to be prepared for any question at any point
Hmm.
about any topic. Sometimes I'll tell them I don't know, or I need time to think about that. I have to ask someone about that, and that's okay. Like,
That's
right,
perfect.
like you don't, I don't claim to know everything. I'm a
Right.
rabbi. Yes, I studied for many years in rabbinic school, and that's a whole long process that I'm sure I could talk about at a different time.
Yep.
But learning's a lifelong process, and there's no secret that there are many people in the world, in this community, in my own school probably, that know a lot more than I know. And there's nothing embarrassing about not knowing things. There's endless amounts to know. So you can say, I don't know. That's okay.
Yeah. I would say all the different guests I've had on and just people that I've talked to in my circle, I've talked to people from all kinds of religions or lack thereof. I've talked to atheists. I've also talked to people who are agnostic or people who are just spiritual. So there's a lot of searching right now in the world. And I think now more than ever, religion is something that people struggle with a lot, myself included. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I think there's a lot of levels to that.
Hmm.
Um, I think part of it is that people view religion as restrictive, which is
Yeah.
definitely it has that negative rap.
Hmm.
And again, certainly there are rules to religion. There are rules to a lot of things, but any
Right.
any society, any functional workplace or institution or whatever it is, whether it's a country, a city, you need rules or you can't function. So yes, a religion has rules, and if you want to call that restrictive, you can call that restrictive because you can't do whatever you want.
Right.
But at the same time, it provides structure. And if you don't have structure, you have chaos and anarchy.
Hmm.
And you can look many places in the world, many situations to see that that situation is not good for anybody.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's true. And I think it's just more about intention and your perspective on those rules is definitely going to be the difference between whether you feel like you're being smothered or whether you feel like it's actually helping you. I know for myself, on like a very basic outside level, like this year, I've switched from working corporate, which is a very clear cut route, how to climb that corporate ladder, how to be successful, what are the rules, how are you supposed to show up every day, to now being like an entrepreneur, which is there are rules and regulations within that as well, but it's a little bit more chaotic. And it's also really different to switch my mentality from being like an employee to being a founder. It's a totally different mentality. But I recently started 75 Hard, which is a mental discipline challenge. And it has 5 tasks that I personally don't think are incredibly hard. It's just more a matter of you have to plan and be strategic about it. Um, and so I could see how having discipline really could help, especially when the world is as chaotic as it is. So, how do you like help people navigate it though when they've had maybe burnout from religion? For example, using myself as an example, because that's always safest to do,
Right.
right? I was a type A personality. I still have it in me, but I like to call myself a recovering type A. And then in high school, I went to an extremely intense high school, and I feel like we just burnt each other out. It lasted a little longer after high school, but like early 20s was when I really started to struggle. And like I went on this journey where I was like, okay, me and God have to work it out and have like a good foundational relationship. Let me work on that first. Whatever's meaningful to me, I'll keep. And then whatever's not, it's a journey. I'm not saying I'll never do it again. I'm just saying, like, currently it's a little much. So, coming from like that perspective, how do you make religion relevant then if you're on a
Yeah. So,
spiritual journey?
right. So again, I mean, just to address specifically the issue you were saying about addressing someone who feels burnt out from religion.
Yeah.
So that kind of touches on the second thing I was thinking of, which often comes up with people and negative associations with religion,
Mhm.
and that is that often, unfortunately, that negative association or feeling is connected more to the people in that in their mind represent the religion more than the religion itself.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Again, without getting into the specifics of your situation, because this is not your podcast, or this is not the episode about you.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but I would imagine that the version of the religion that was pitched to you was a certain person's version. It was
Yes.
the version of whatever educators you had, not to speak about those people because I don't know them or much
There's
about
also
what they
no right
did.
or wrong. It's just what spoke to them and what worked for them.
Right, right, and
But owning it as if it's the only way
right,
is problematic.
right, for sure. Right, it definitely is important to understand that there are with even within a specific religion that has very specific expectations and rules. And speaking for Judaism, because that's the one that we're a part of,
Right?
there definitely are very specific and sometimes demanding expectations and rules.
Mhm.
But at the same time, there is room for individuality, and there are different opinions about what exactly the requirements are, and there's a wide range, and when certain rules could be applied or when you could be more lenient. If a person is presenting one very narrow specific path, that often is the beginning of a lot of problems for many people. And that's something that I myself, as a teacher of religion,
Mhm.
I take very seriously. That I know, and maybe this sounds a little bit crazy of a statement to make, but I know that my students, the type of relationship that I have with my students and the way they view me, ultimately is the way they view God. And that's a lot. That's a heavy responsibility, and I
Oh,
don't I
interesting. Because you're an authority figure and God's an authority
right again
figure.
as far as they're concerned, and for many of these kids, I teach them sometimes, for a majority of their Judaic studies classes.
Mhm.
So whatever version and of course they've had other teachers in the past, and even now they have other teachers.
Right.
But for sure, for a kid that if they look up to me and I'm close with that student, their perception of Judaism, their perception of God, is going to be based largely off their perception of me.
100%. 'Cause I wasn't
Um,
afraid of God growing up. There was a very specific teacher who I was very afraid of, and even post high school would have nightmares about her, but that's true. So I firsthand could tell you 100% that that's true.
right. So like the first, I mean, again, I'm dealing with people at a younger age, where they hopefully have not experienced much burnout. They probably haven't had much experience with the religion altogether. That's more often the case.
Okay.
A kid, someone, a seventh or eighth grader, or even a high school student, which is the people that I'm teaching, if they're not engaged in religion, it's certainly not the students that I'm teaching. It's not because they were overexposed and got burnt out. It's because they never had a connection or a real exposure to start with.
Even if they were, are these kids coming from religious homes or not necessarily?
So the vast majority, it depends. I don't know how you define religious. Um,
Okay,
but
this was explained to
right,
me.
right. So what, yeah.
Explained to me was, so this is like a really broad way to explain if someone's religious or not, but there's like the three things, which is like nigia, like whether they touch or not, shomer nigia too, before you're married, all that, and then also after, whether you keep kosher or not, and then keeping Shabbos. Those are the three.
Yeah,
So,
so the first one I think is a more complicated topic, especially within the demographic that I teach.
right,
Um,
fair,
but sticking to Shabbos, if you want to call religion, keeping Shabbos and keeping kosher,
yeah,
the vast majority of the students I teach come from homes. I would say, yeah, the majority. I don't know if I said the vast majority. The majority of students come from homes that keep Shabbos and keep kosher.
okay,
Whether they personally are so strict, that's obviously sometimes harder
up
to
to
know.
them, yeah.
But and even the ones that come from families that maybe they themselves do not fully keep Shabbos or fully keep kosher, they certainly know that that's the ideal, and that's certainly the viewpoint of the school that that's the ideal.
Going back to that for a second, I think intention is so big with that too, because I think you could have people who identify as religious, but maybe struggle in some of these areas. But I think as long as their intention is to work towards it, that's a very different perspective than someone who's, let's say, like, I know what I should be doing, but I'm choosing not to. And I think that's also part of what I identify as like religious or not. But I think sometimes it could be really hard because you can like really love and identify with the religion as a whole, but maybe not find your tribe and your people within the religion. Because you're right, there are many different types of Jews, but like finding your right crew is hard.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I can only speak mostly to the demographic that I deal with. And it's
Right.
interesting, just something that you brought up that made me think of this. Um, One of the issues that is sometimes a sensitive and sticky issue in the school that I work in is that we do have students from a range of backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
Some students come from very religious homes, and some students come from homes that are not so religious. And it is the belief of some that we should not push religion too much or come on too strong about our religious ideology or religious philosophy because we don't want to offend or make certain students feel bad who are coming from homes that are less observant, less religious. My comeback to that, because I do not believe that that's what we should be doing.
Okay.
My response to that is it's okay to let them know that this is the ideal to
Yeah.
be it's an orthodox school, which means that we believe that keeping the full scope of Jewish law is
Mm-hmm.
the ideal that we strive for. Obviously, we understand that nobody's perfect. We're all working towards that goal, but we should not be embarrassed to say that being fully observant and keeping all the laws that Judaism expects of you,
Is a good thing.
that is the ideal. Now,
Yeah.
I know I'm fully aware that some of the students in my class come from homes that do not fully keep Shabbat or they don't fully keep kosher. Um, but that's okay. It's okay for me to say that this is the ideal, even knowing that certain students come from families where they're not there yet, or even if their families do, maybe they personally are not there yet. Because I also tell them that life is a growth process, and guess what? You're 12 or 13 or 15, 16, 17.
Mm-hmm.
You're young, you're very early on your journey, you're going to grow, you're going to mature. And if you're not there yet, that's okay. And guess what? I, as your teacher, feel the same way about you wherever you are on your journey as I do about the person who's super religious. I've taught I've taught children of super Orthodox rabbis, and I've taught children of conservative rabbis. And they both thought that they were my favorite student
Oh,
because
cool.
in my mind, it's not what it's about. It's not about how observant you are, and therefore I like you more because you're
Right.
better at following the rules. I'm here to tell you that this is what our religion believes in, and you may be further along the road or not further along the road, and that's okay because we don't have to. We don't have. You're not a bad person for being earlier on in your journey, especially when you're a teenager. Like that's
Right.
you're not even anywhere yet. So again, I feel very strongly that expressing the ideals of what we're striving for does not have to make someone feel bad for being earlier on in that journey.
Right. And it's interesting because talking to a lot of different Orthodox people, they're so grateful to be Orthodox, especially in today's climate. They just feel like there's so much chaos going on that to be able to have something meaningful to them to lean back onto and to give them structure and hope is helpful. So like going back to like the title of the episode saying like that religion is relevant, what does that mean to you and how you want to pass that on not only to like the kids that you're teaching, but also just to people who you're just talking to?
Right. So
It's a broad question, I know. Take
right.
it where you want
So
to.
I'll tell you what I think it what I think it means. It's interesting though because as I was thinking about what to say on this episode, and as I'm thinking about what I'm going to be saying right now,
Mm-hmm.
I'm also thinking to myself, well, if this is really my goal, I probably need to work on being a little more explicit in saying these types of things to my students because again, they definitely come out um, through comments here and there, and I definitely feel like they are going to get the sentiment that I'm about to talk about. But it's always good to be more explicit.
Yeah.
Um, but kind of what I was getting at is that certainly at the stage of life when, like we spoke about, they're just starting to think, and they're just starting to explore their individuality and their freedom as um, young, growing adults, growing into adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
Something like religion, which has a lot of rules and a lot of restrictions, and they already feel like they have too many rules and too many restrictions, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
from the school, from their parents, from their teachers, whatever it is. To them, this is just another thing piled on their whole big package of rules and restrictions, which they're not happy about because they want to be their own people and they want to do whatever they want.
Right.
Um, so I think, and that makes it very hard for young people, especially, to really fully connect religion. But the thing that I think makes it super relevant, and it could be many of them are not at a stage of maturity and understanding and life experience to fully get this until later on. But so many of the things they're struggling with, when they fully connect to the religion and what that means and how that affects their life, they'll find that it really addresses so many of the things they struggle with in their own lives right now. Because I think it's no secret that the thing which is spoken about more than anything else in the world is all over the world, everyone is dealing with anxiety and stress, and
Mm-hmm.
they feel like they're overworked and overwhelmed and depressed. Um, it sounds sad and depressing, but it's
Mm-hmm.
the reality. There's a whole lot of anxiety, depression, unhappiness in the world.
Yeah.
Um, and that could be linked to a lot of things. And again, obviously, the mental health things, we're not getting into that right now. That's certainly not my area of expertise. But on the basic level, when people don't feel connected to anything in their lives. They don't feel like they have a goal. They don't feel like they have a meaning.
Yeah.
They don't feel like they have a sense of stability. That is really anxiety inducing. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot to worry about when you don't know where your life is going. You don't feel like you have any control in your life. You don't feel like there's anyone steering where your life is going. You don't feel like you have a purpose in life. Those are scary things to deal with.
Yeah.
And if a person has religion, that really provides all those things for them. You have a purpose in life. If you believe in God, maybe obviously people go through challenges, and that's part of God's plan. Nobody escapes suffering, nobody escapes challenges at some point in their life.
Right.
But if you truly believe that there's a God up there who's controlling world events, controlling your specific life events, and there is a plan, there is a reason why everything happens, there is someone watching out for you, and part of that is to believe that God loves you and cares about you.
Yeah.
If you believe that God is a mean, scary God who wants to punish you, that's another issue you have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
But if you really believe in the version of God that I believe we believe in,
Right.
which is a loving, caring God who wants what's best for you,
And as your father.
right, and is like your
Yeah.
father, doesn't mean there's no consequences, but is like your father,
Mm-hmm.
then that really, you can let a lot of the stress go because you know that somebody's driving the ship, someone's driving your life, and you have a goal and a purpose, and you know where you're going, you know what you're supposed to be doing. Getting
Totally.
there is a process, but at least you have a good starting point.
Well, see, I think that's why on my personal journey, that's why I was first like, let me work on my relationship with God first, because that's the basis of everything, right? Like, if you don't believe it, if you're trying to do it to impress others, it's not going to have the same value and meaning as it does if you're doing it for like a God purpose and a God reason, right? Um, I don't know if we've talked about this, but my listeners definitely know my obsession. This past January, I've gotten really into Kabbalah.
Okay.
Yeah. Which shouldn't be so surprising. But I'm really into like spirituality, and I think a lot of people feel a lot of pain and anxiety when they don't know why things are happening to them. Because you're right, challenges are inevitable, regardless of your stage of life. And so understanding how everything connects really brings people a lot of comfort. And I think what's also important, and I think you touched on this as well, was that like it's a process and no one expects you to be perfect. A previous guest said something super profound, which was God expects progress, not perfection. And I really liked the way she coined that quote because as long as you're working towards a goal of getting better and connecting more to something higher than yourself, it's okay if you're not perfect straight off the bat. And it's okay if you make mistakes. And sometimes it feels like you took 10 steps backwards, right? Like as long as you know like what you said, how you're teaching, this is the, what was the word you used in terms of like Judaism and religion in general?
I don't remember what you're referring to, but
This is the ideal.
right, the ideal,
This is
right,
the ideal.
right,
That's what I wanted to say. Like,
yeah.
this is the ideal. So, the reason why I really liked Kabbalah too was like, I think a lot of it that I personally struggle with, I don't know if anyone else out there relates to this. I'm sure you do, because this is why Kabbalah is so popular. Is that okay, it's one thing to believe in God, and it's one thing to believe that there's a higher purpose, and you know, but sometimes it could feel like you want to be at least, if you're not supposed to be, if you don't know where you're at, you're like, okay, well, lead me to be able to do something, right? It's really hard to feel like you're sitting on your hands and you're like, I want to do something. If I can't have my ideal life, what I think should have happened by now, well, let me at least work towards it. And when you don't know what that direction is, that could be really hard and really scary. And just doing the regular, everyday ideals of Judaism and religion, or whatever religion it is, could feel like, I don't know, monotonous. And what's the point if you're not working towards something too? If that makes sense. I'll let that kind of
Yeah,
marinate.
just to clarify, I mean, you're again, just clarify what's the question you're asking?
The question I'm asking is not a question yet.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
getting there. I'm
Yeah.
building. I'm building. Hold
Yeah.
on. It's the whole thing. Um, but what I'm saying is what I liked, what I was, it wasn't a question. It was more about like what I liked about Kabbalah was that like it's saying that the only thing that we have control over in this world is how we react to things. So we're supposed to get good things, but at the same time, we have to go through challenges sometimes so we can be the vessel that could receive them. That's part of why we go through challenges as an opportunity to grow and evolve, to become the things that we've prayed for. Um, so that's why I really like Kabbalah and spirituality. It's easier for my personality to mesh with versus, so I guess my question is going back to that religious perspective, how do you navigate the religious perspective on that? Because I don't know, sometimes spirituality is something people can really relate to, but it can feel too restrictive. So how is it relevant then? If you just don't feel like you could take on another thing. Because even let's say with those kids you're talking about, they're at that age, right, where they're like already having so many rules from school and at home, and then you throw on religion on top of that, and it feels like a lot. Well, guess what? That translates way into your life, even when you're an adult, where you feel like you have all these responsibilities and there's so much to figure out, and you're an adult, but you feel like you're not.
Okay.
Do
Yeah.
you get what I'm
So
saying?
I think I know what you're saying.
Let's clarify the question. You say the question first, because I feel like I went on a whole tangent. So let's see if we can bring it back home.
Yes, I think what you're asking, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that there are many people that understand that spirituality serves a constructive purpose in their life,
Yeah.
and they are attracted to that concept
Mm-hmm.
of spirituality, but the practicalities of law and very, minute expectations that a particular religion, Judaism specifically, which we're talking about,
Yup.
has very many specific and sometimes hard to understand and relate to laws.
Yep.
So a person might be spiritual, but they just can't connect to the minutia of the religion,
Yep.
and certain laws that they find to be a drag or a burden.
Yeah.
Okay.
At any stage of life.
Right. So that's definitely a difficult question.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly when talking to a teenager who has limited life experience, limited self-control, limited foresight,
Mm-hmm.
it's certainly a hard concept to drive home. Although I try to do it every day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, I'm a stubborn person. I don't give up. But I think one of the big challenges that we face as a whole, and certainly, um, young people in their teenage years especially face this, is that everybody's looking for a quick fix.
Yes.
Nobody wants to put in the work. Everybody loves losing weight, but nobody loves going on a diet.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have all kinds of cheat codes like injections and whatnot, which, maybe you'll be hooked on the rest of your life, or all sorts of, cure-all surgeries that tell you you'll lose weight.
Yeah.
Um, all those things have short-term effects, unless you're hooked on maybe a certain medication the rest of your life, which who knows what that's going to do to you.
Right.
But doing the actual hard work of going on a diet, that's really hard work. That's, for some people, that's maybe insurmountable. And everything in life is like that. So everybody likes the idea of spirituality, and being, connected and holy and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there are no quick fixes. I think sometimes I think the reason why Kabbalah is attractive to some and it's
Mm-hmm.
faddish, is that people just view that as like quick fix, like rabbi, spiritual person, give me my injection of godliness, of spirituality,
Okay.
and I'll just go flying off into the clouds. So that's nice. For some people, maybe that works. But the reality is, for most people, that's not going to be real. It's not going to be sustainable, because anything which is real and sustainable, it involves hard work. and it involves sacrifice.
Yeah.
Besides for religion and of course my family, another one of my great passions and loves in life is sports. And teaching teenage boys, I often meld those two, and I always love going to sports analogies.
Hmm.
One, because I love talking about sports, and two, because they work really well.
Yeah.
And I can give you a million examples, but I'll just give you one or two. One of the greatest athletes will for sure go down as one of the greatest athletes, probably the greatest quarterback of all time, is Tom Brady. Just retired a couple years ago. Uh, what many people may or may not know about Tom Brady is, yeah, they know he's a great quarterback, but they don't necessarily know the sacrifices he put in. So one thing I heard about Tom Brady a couple years ago, which fascinated me very much, is that for the entire duration of his playing career, which was approximately 15 years or so,
Hmm.
he did not eat any processed sugar and he
Wow.
did not have coffee.
Wow.
So he had a whole crazy diet. I think he wrote a book about it. He had a whole personal nutrition and a whole plan that kept his body healthy. And he played football longer than most people do. He played into his 40s,
Right.
which is not something that many people do. And that's because he was dedicated to taking care of his body. Is not having sugar easy or fun? I can't imagine doing such a thing. Is
Right.
not having coffee easy or fun? I can't imagine not having coffee.
Well, especially with
But
my coffee shop becoming a
exactly,
thing,
right.
I'm
Certainly,
like, absolutely not.
we're not going to promote no coffee
Yeah.
to you. But he had a goal.
Yeah.
He wanted to be one of the greatest football players ever. He wanted to play to a certain age. He was dedicated to that, and he was willing to make great sacrifice to do that. Kobe Bryant, another great historic athlete, one of the greatest basketball players to ever live. It is known that his workout and practice routine was insane. It was literally insane.
Yeah.
But he got up before everyone else. He showed up at the gym before anyone else. He practiced more shots than anyone else. He worked harder than anyone else, and he was one of the greatest. But that didn't come with a shortcut. It came with sacrifice and discipline, and following a regiment and a routine. And there's some people are not good at regiment and routine,
Right.
and that's okay. You can find your own version. You can find your own place and your level that you're happy with,
Your flavor of Judaism, if you
right?
will.
But
There's
you
still going
have
to
to
be
understand that
rules.
for every give, there's a take.
Right.
Like you cannot have the end product without the sacrifice. And if you're not willing to sacrifice, you have to be happy with a different end product.
Right. I mean, Zadie once said to me, and this was not even about religion, mind you. I was still like super religious when we had this conversation. Um, he was just saying that there's consequences for all your actions. And like I think a lot of times people hear the word consequence and they have like a negative connotation for it, but he wasn't even meaning that. He's like just there literally will be a consequence, a result of whatever choice and decision you make, you know? Just for the sake of Kabbalah, I'm just gonna say I thought it was so woo-woo and I was freaked out of it for so long. What attracted it to me was that there's this one particular teacher who I took like virtual classes. Like I took a master class, was pre-recorded. His name was David Guillaume. And what I liked about it was it wasn't just so woo-woo and spiritual. It was like practical guided steps and practices to do. It's on a different playing field than Orthodox Judaism and the Torah, but it's more about like your basic approach. Like, for example, like your reactive state. And I think we know that a lot of like, just in general, a lot of sins, a lot of bad decisions that you're going to make, you make when you're feeling anxious or angry or scared or, I don't know, numb, even, right? So the best example that he always gives is if you're driving somewhere and you're trying to get there on time and you're hitting every red light and you could literally feel your body like just getting so stressed out in that moment, pause. And even just the pause is so powerful. And then you say, what a pleasure. We're accepting the situation for what it is. And then he defines like faith, which I love, as certainty beyond logic. So you're saying, I have certainty beyond logic that this is all working out for me. I have trust in the Creator, in God, that this is all going to work out. And then later in the courses, he goes into more specific things like the benefits of not cursing, the benefits of not doing evil speech. And so like he definitely integrates like the Torah later into it. And I think he
All right.
became from later.
Mhm.
But it's not at least the way he presents it, it's not like the woo-woo type of spirituality,
Hmm.
just to preface.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I'm sure again, Kabbalah is
Yeah.
not an area that I've explored.
Right. And it's
Um,
different depending on who teaches it for sure. But I think it's just like there's so many different ways to approach Judaism, I think.
right, for sure. Again,
Yeah.
there are definitely different approaches and different areas of Judaism that a person could focus on. Obviously, there are, there's only so much leeway within the traditional form of the religion.
If you're going to be called
Right,
Orthodox,
exactly right.
yes.
If you want to fit into the traditional, original
Yeah.
form of Judaism, there's only so much that the bounds can be stretched. Um,
Right. Well, what do you do if you recognize that the Torah is true and you recognize that ultimately there's benefits to it, but for whatever reason you just have that block and you find it hard to accept and take on those steps, the minutia, if you will. It's not that you're turning away everything, but maybe there's like certain areas that are just hard for you to approach. Now, yes, it's a journey, and yes, we accept and love people for every stage that they're at. But again, if you're not following certain protocols, you're not in Orthodox Judaism. No
right.
hate, no shade. That's just the way it is.
Right. So again, where I draw the line, and again, maybe different people have different answers. Kind of going back to what I said before, it's about what you consider the ideal. So there are different streams and whatever you want to call them, types of Judaism,
Hmm.
um, that have created their own version of what the expectations are. And the at least the Orthodox Judaism, which is traditional Judaism, views that as a terrible thing because it's true that there are different levels of what people can handle and different levels of what people are ready for, but that doesn't mean you change
The
you it doesn't
religion.
mean you change the religion. So
Right.
I've had on numerous occasions students who come from less observant backgrounds, or even if they don't, but they just want to challenge me
Because they're that
because they're
age.
at that age, right?
Yeah.
And they'll say, well, how can you say that like everyone has to do XYZ? Like maybe someone can't do that. I say, okay, it's okay for you not to be there. This is where God wants us to be at.
Right.
You're not there. You can't foresee that you'll ever get there. Okay, you don't know what you're going to get to
No,
because
you never
you
know.
have a long life ahead of you, God willing,
Yeah.
but don't change your aspirations. Say, this is where I hope I can get to. This is what I aspire to get to. Will I get there? How close will I get to there? I don't know. But just because you don't think you can get there now, certainly when you're at a young stage of life, don't therefore say I'm going to lower the bar. That's not good.
Yeah, I agree. But I think there's also like different approaches, like because there's changing the religion and creating like your own version, your own communities. There's that aspect. But then there's also the aspect of like on a personal level, you'll be like, I recognize that the Torah is true. I recognize and respect and honor the Orthodox community. I just don't feel like I can consider myself that currently based on my actions. Does that make sense?
Um, yeah. I think I know what you're saying. I mean, you're saying that the community itself has a certain definition of what you have to do practically to be considered within our box.
Or even within yourself, you have a certain ideal of what you think you have to do to be in the box. Like out of maybe respect, you're just like, this is what I need to be considered Orthodox. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So again, this is like a complicated area, but I think that a lot of it, again, going back to what I spoke about separating the people who represent the religion from
Hmm.
the religion itself. I think a lot of that perception and that mindset is created by us. It's not from God. Like
Right.
the idea that there are different streams of Judaism is a fairly recent phenomenon. Until a couple hundred years ago, there was no Orthodox, conservative, reform, 17 different stripes and types of Judaism. There was just Judaism. There were always people in Judaism that were not religious, or quote unquote, not religious. There was always people that were worse at keeping the laws, but they weren't like in a different camp. They weren't like, oh, well, that person is not us anymore. Okay, so that person is in a very different place in their journey for whatever reason, they're not following the expectations right now. But there wasn't really anywhere else to go. Like these like walls and these lines and these boxes we've created, that was created by us because I don't think God ever made those boxes. So that a lot of that is like self-perception. And again, I'm not saying it's easy for a person to get out of their head and get out of those perceptions that society or maybe themselves have created, but that's like a fake construct, which is never, what I don't think was ever intended to be part of the religion,
Yeah. Labeling is disabling.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, that's actually really beautiful.
right. Like I don't think the labels necessarily serve
If
so
anything, they
so much
stop
of
you.
again. I'm not going to say they never serve a constructive purpose because sometimes you do need a little bit of societal pressure to make you do what you're supposed to do. I'm not gonna even the conformity is a bad word. It's used as an evil word in our society.
But it could be
Um,
good.
right, but it could be good. Like, I mean, we don't believe that like even though I guess they have places where you could do this, but we don't believe that everyone should just go running naked in the street because they feel like it. That's
Right.
doesn't fly in most places in
I
society.
think a better analogy would be, let's say, like everyone understands that there's benefits to working out, right? Some people choose to
Hmm.
work out at home, and some people choose to work out at a gym. The thing about if you're doing it at home in the privacy of your own space and no one knows whether you did it or not, you may do an amazing job. You may not. No one will know but you. But when you go to a big gym and you're seeing everyone working out, what are you going to do? Like just sit there scrolling on TikTok and not work out at the gym? There's that positive conformity when you put yourself in the right environments.
Right,
Right. And like I know a lot of entrepreneurs are really big on like being like, you want to surround yourself like with the right people because show me your friends and I'll show you your future and like, that kind of environment.
right,
So I think one of my favorite things about Judaism, and it's something that as I'm having these conversations, I'm realizing is more and more of a rarity in the world, is like the concept of like a cheshbon hanefesh, which I guess literally you can just translate as like an audit of the soul, where like at least daily, if not throughout your day, you're constantly just evaluating and thinking about your actions and what you're doing. And I think that's so beneficial. Not many people in the world really take that time to do that self-reflection.
right. And just like going back to like the population in the like the community and the school that I teach in,
Mm-hmm.
I think very much reflects this idea that I'm trying to say, um, that really there's no need usually for these boxes. And again, not I don't think we ever had a full conversation about your negative experiences in your Jewish, education and Jewish journey. But my perception, at least from being your brother, is that a lot of it came from being in an environment and being around people that were very into speaking out these lines and these boxes. And if you don't do X, Y, Z, you're not in the box.
Right.
In the school that I teach in, it's so not like that.
Mm.
Almost sometimes almost to a fault. And I say that what's unique about the school that I teach in is that at least in this community, the lines are sometimes so blurred that people don't even realize they're in like a different category. Like I teach students that come from pretty far, relatively far right on the Orthodox spectrum, and students that come from very strongly conservative homes. They sit and learn in the same classrooms, and we're all learning together. I'm teaching them at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, and some of these students, maybe they know intellectually, but I really truly don't think that they perceive themselves, the kid from the conservative home, many of them, I don't think perceive themselves as so different than the kid from the Orthodox home because it's not like shoved in their face. It's not spoken about. It's all about, listen, this is the religion. This is what God wants us to do. We're all working on getting there. Maybe we're here, maybe we're there, but like we're all just working to get better every day. Like
Right.
the differences and the boxes are very much not spoken about.
Yeah, and I don't think in elementary school it was really that strict in terms of like the boxes and whatnot, because growing up in a small community in the Midwest, like you have all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds, even
Right.
in an Orthodox school. But I would say that like I think where that conversation shifted in high school was because there was a lot of marriage-minded conversations. And so there was a lot, like the onus they really put on us as future wives, as future moms to set the tone. And if we wanted certain types of guys, we had to be certain types of girls. And
Okay,
that's when the
interesting.
pressure came in.
Right. It's interesting. It's actually funny. That was another main topic I was had in my head to get around to
Okay.
about like the relevance of the religion, and maybe it's again when you're talking to certainly junior high students, even high school students. I think it's hard for them to project that far in the future.
Hmm.
But the reality is that religion, and certainly the Jewish religion, is very family centric.
It is.
There's no question that for better or for worse, a major focus of the religion is getting to the point where
Getting
where
married.
you're getting married and raising a family.
Hmm.
Um,
And then if you don't get married and raise a family early on, it can be really difficult, even if you are religious, to still be part of the community because you feel more and more isolated.
right. So that's yeah, that's like a separate issue that I don't think we want to go down to the whole issue of the shidduch crisis or older singles and their
I
relation to
don't
the community. Right.
I don't think that there's a shittle crisis. That's my 2 cents. I'll just throw that out here for the sake of this conversation. I
Right.
don't think there's a shittle crisis. I think there's an Amuna crisis.
Okay.
I think that God doesn't forget our address and he knows exactly when we're supposed to get married and like when we're supposed to be parents and when those souls are supposed to come in as children for us. And so I think like the crisis is that there's this expectation that it should happen so young. Part of the reason why there's this expectation that it should happen so young is because a big part of our culture and religion is building a family and passing it down. So it's kind of like this catch 22 where it's like you have to have faith in God that it's going to happen when it's supposed to happen. But at the same time, when it doesn't happen, then you feel like I'm not doing what our culture and religion is supposed to do. So that's going to be said. But personally speaking, not that I haven't had my dark moments, I'm just saying, like, I'm 28. Looking back, personally, I feel like God knew me specifically exactly what he was doing. Like the character development and what I needed to go through. Like, I wasn't ready. And I think I'm going to have a much stronger relationship and family because of it.
Right.
So I feel very blessed and grateful. And I could see why God did what he did with me
Yeah.
personally. But I'm just speaking
Right.
of
Right.
how it could
Yeah,
feel.
right. But without getting like down that whole conversation about whatever, older singles in the Jewish community,
Yeah.
but kind of like the point that I wanted to touch upon is that even though the whole idea of pushing like that getting married and raising a family is like part of this whole ideal picture that we push and strive for, even though that may be flying in the face of a lot of modern day values that society holds dear, and a lot of the last number of at least the last number of decades, society has spent a lot of time trashing religion and trashing
Hmm.
marriage and the need to have a family, and feminism and women's rights and all these things. Getting back to kind of one of our earlier points, all this so-called freedom and getting away from all those things that people view as like restrictive or maybe um, antiquated, it has definitely not led to more happiness.
Hmm.
And the reality, whether a person wants to spend time denying it or not, and there are still people trying to deny it, but the reality is that the most people are the most happy when they're in a structured and safe family environment. There's no way to reproduce that. So to try to like get away from the idea of that building a family is the ideal, it's not really reality because a lot of the anxiety and stress and insecurity people feel is because of the breakdown of families.
100%.
Um,
But it is important to say, though, that is only true if you enter a healthy relationship
for sure.
and if it's the right person, the right time. There's a lot of, and that's where I'm saying, like, each person has their own story and their own journey. And it is challenging if you have to wait for it to happen. So, Everyone
Right. So
has their
that
own
again, so
journey.
that's often a conversation, a sticky conversation that comes up, and it gets back to what we're talking about with everything. I know this is a cliche that a lot of my teachers and rabbis have been accused of using too much,
Hmm.
but everything's a balance.
Yeah.
So I think it's okay, again, knowing that, promoting and pushing the fact that getting married and having a family, which it is important,
It is.
it truly is important, that has a downside of that. Well, what if a person doesn't find the right person or they don't get married right away? So how does that make them feel? How does that help them fit into society? Well, not too much.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that we stop pushing the ideal.
Right.
We have to figure out a better way to integrate those people and make them feel valued and make them feel like they still have a purpose, a meaningful purpose, and can make great contributions despite not being yet married or yet having a family.
Right.
But that doesn't mean coming down from pushing the value of having a family because
Right,
you
because
can't.
it still works for a lot of people, and a lot of people still do at a young age find their person and grow families. And like we're not being like, oh, we're gonna stop the next generation till this generation finds it. Like the continuity has to continue. And I think also from a teacher's perspective, I'm sure you have this all the time where like you have a curriculum, right? And you have maybe probably 85% of your students that are moving along just fine. And you have that last little percentage that's just not quite making it, but you can't stop the curriculum for those last 15. You have to kind of figure out and navigate how to help them without taking away from the plan.
Right. And I think, right, I think a lot of the things we're talking about keep coming back to the same point that
Yeah.
there's a need for a goal and an ideal and a structure and system of how to get to that goal, how to get to the ideal. There's always going to be people on the fringes, and you have to figure out how to make those people feel valued and feel like they're still okay and good people,
Hmm.
and that they're not bad for not yet being at the ideal. But that doesn't mean you have to stop talking about the ideal.
Right. And I will also say that I've definitely gone through my own season, and I'm sure other people have too. And this is, I think, true in anything that you have a desire for, which is like sometimes if you have a desire for something and it's not happening in your time frame of how fast you want it to happen, you could be like, start to tell yourself, well, maybe it's not meant for me, and maybe I should do something else, and maybe my purpose isn't this. And you start to go into these spirals and talk yourself out of your own heart's desire, no matter how much you want it. And as painful as it is, you'll just like kind of bury it and just be like, no, I'm fine. I don't need it. It's fine. And like, that's not true. And I feel like anyone who said that, maybe that's what their survival instinct is. But the truth is, we all have these desires for a reason. Going back to Kabbalah, this was something Kabbalah said that was like very comforting for me, which was the fulfillment comes before the desire. So if you have a desire for something, it's because you are supposed to have that desire. When it's supposed to happen, it's not promised that it's going to happen instantaneously. But I think there is a comfort to that knowledge of knowing that if I have a desire for something, then I'm meant to receive it. And just trusting that it could, like Kabbalah talks about how like things could happen either like be'ito in its proper time when it's fated and destined, right? Which may not be at all in your timeline and when you want it to happen. Or you can speed up when things happen to you by practicing the pause. What a pleasure. Having total faith and then being a more positive person. And by doing that, you can speed up. Like you have to go through pain, you have to go through challenges. But what could have been 4 years can become 4 hours of pain, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
I
not
know,
sure.
I know I'm talking to you about something you're not familiar with.
Right.
I
I'm
know.
not sure I totally wrap my head around what you just said.
Okay, fine, fair.
um, but but yeah, and again, it's all about the process. And getting back to like teaching, which again, I know this episode is not fully about teaching. Um, but
But it's who you are,
right.
right? It's your purpose.
Um, part of what I think people find maddening and frustrating about teaching the age that I teach, and it certainly um, is that very rarely do you see the results you want
Mm,
anywhere close to the moment.
yeah.
It's a lot of investing and hoping that something is going in. And even
It's
though
so true.
it doesn't seem like that on that day or the next day or the next week, you may see flashes of it and then a lot of looking like they're not getting anything. But you have to trust that by driving home certain ideals and certain messages, you have to believe that it is going in,
Yep.
and that a few maybe it might be weeks, days, years down the line, something's going to catch and sprout when the maturity kicks in, when they see the value of it, it's going to kick in. But there's a lot of things in life we do without seeing the results right away,
Yep.
and you got to believe that the results are going to come. That's not easy.
Nope.
To put in, like we said, putting in the work. The work part is not fun and not easy. Um, it's certainly not easy when you're putting in a lot of work without seeing any results or even fully being sure there will be results.
Mm.
But you got to trust the process.
You do. A phrase that I've coined recently, and I think you can use it as a teacher for your grade level, or I guess as an entrepreneur, or if you're on a weight loss journey, or whatever stage of life you're in, that you're putting in a lot of hard work consistently and you're not seeing results. I call it my planting season, where it's like when you plant the seeds under the ground, like you're nurturing it and you're putting in so much work, but you're not going to see the results. And I had a friend who once said, he said, I'm okay with planting a tree that I'm not going to get to sit under.
Right,
Which is a powerful statement too,
right,
you know?
right. Often what makes it so difficult, if we were planting something knowing that there's going to be a tree years later,
Hmm.
even though we might not see it, we can be okay with that.
Right.
I think the biggest struggle is that most of what we do in life, in many areas of life, we're planting, hoping and believing that there will be a tree, but we really have no idea if there's ever going to be a tree.
It's
If
very
we knew there
true.
would be a tree, it would be a whole lot easier.
Right.
But we're planting without even knowing if there's going to be a tree.
Hmm.
We're like I can just tell you like Ephraim, one day before Rosh Hashanah, he was learning about apples and dip the apple in the honey,
Ephraim's his
and
son, my nephew, by
um,
the way.
yes, so very cute. So he comes home from school one day,
Yeah.
and he wants to plant his apples. He wants to plant his apple trees. So he goes out there with his apple seeds, wanting to put them in the ground and pour some water on them. He thinks there's going to be an apple tree tomorrow.
Oh my gosh.
Um, Obviously, we explained to him, I think his teachers explained to him also that it takes quite a bit more than that. I think it's like 10, 15 years, something like that.
Yeah, at
It's
least.
a long time.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know how long it takes to see anything. But I imagine that if it's taking that many years to grow a tree, you got to stick that seed in the dirt and pour a lot of water on it,
Mm-hmm.
seeing nothing. And I don't think I have the patience for that.
Right. Well, I think but that analogy is so profound because that is so true. Like, and I think that's where faith comes in,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, and I think it all comes down to we're not supposed to rely on miracles, but at the same time, we also are not supposed to completely rely on our own work entirely either. It's a partnership. You're supposed to put in the work, but you're also supposed to at some point be like, it's your turn, God. Like, tag, you're it. Like, there's only so much I can do. And as long as you know that you've done everything you can do, I think that's where you can lean back and be like,
Right. And that's kind of like what I was trying to touch on before when we started this conversation about the relevance of religion and how if you really have that connection, and that foundation, it relieves a lot of the anxiety and the stress
it does.
because you don't have to be in control.
No.
Um, Once you know that the results are kind of out of your hands and there's nothing you can do,
Mm-hmm.
that's when the calm kicks in.
Mm-hmm.
The stress and the anxiety comes from thinking, even though maybe this sounds counterintuitive, but the stress and the anxiety comes from thinking that you are in control.
Right.
When you realize that you're not, that is the greatest piece. And again, there's probably many examples you can give of this,
Totally.
but you see so many times stories of people that are, God forbid, going through, an illness. When a person still has hope of overcoming the illness, that is a stressful and difficult time, and they're running here, running there, trying this treatment, trying that treatment.
And they see
When
death. It's
when
scary.
a person has a diagnosis
Mm-hmm.
of that, I'm sorry, we've done everything we can try, and besides for God's intervention, you're going to die in some short time.
Mm-hmm.
Those people generally are calmer
Yeah.
because there's nothing you can do other than just accept that this is not in your control.
Right.
Um,
No offense, but that's exactly what Kabbalah says. I'm just saying. It's like that
I'm
whole thing.
Listen, I'm sure the Kabbalah got it from somewhere.
Of
Um,
course, it's all but I'm saying, like, the way you know what it is? Ma gets on me about this all the time, where she'll tell me something, and then she'll be like I'll hear it from a friend or a podcast or someone else, right? Even in high school, like, I'd hear it from a teacher, and I'd be like, "I heard the most brilliant thing." She's like, "I literally told you this."
right. It reminds me of a great story.
But it's how it was said, when
Right.
it was said, who's
So it reminds me of a great story that I heard from a friend of mine who was a few years older than me in yeshiva in rabbinic school.
Mhm,
So for a number of years, when he first, was ordained as a rabbi, he was doing campus outreach. He was doing Jewish outreach on a college campus.
mhm,
So it was a lot of, just tracking down students and, hey, how are you doing? Oh, you're Jewish? Okay, like let's go out for coffee. And kind of just sitting down and trying to get them involved, get them to sit down and learn, get into the religion.
yeah,
So he met a certain student, and they set up a coffee date, coffee meeting,
mhm,
and they got to talking. And he said, "So tell me, like, is there anything about Judaism that you've ever been fascinated in learning or finding out more about?" And so this college kid said, "Yeah, like I've heard a lot about Kabbalah. Like, I really want to learn more about Kabbalah."
mhm.
He's like, "Okay, fascinating." He's like, "Can you tell me, like, what is it specifically about Kabbalah that you would like to learn more about?" He's like, "I don't know, like, what is our purpose here in this world? Like, what are we doing here? Like, what's..." So he's like, "Oh, like, fascinating." He's like, "I happen to have a book here that was written by one of the greatest Kabbalists of all time, and the introduction to that book actually talks about this very topic." And he proceeds to pull out a Mesilas Yesharim,
I knew you were gonna say
which is
this.
the path of the just. Was written by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lutzato, who in fact was the author of other Kabbalah works.
Yeah,
This particular book was not a book that is considered to be Kabbalah,
yeah,
but it spoke about what this person thought was Kabbalah.
mhm.
So they proceeded to spend, and again, I don't know what ever happened of this college kid or if he became religious or what became of him, but the point was that they spent, some time after that learning what he thought was Kabbalah, but it was not in fact Kabbalah.
Right.
So
Well,
Kabbalah is just a label that people, oh, this is Kabbalah. What I don't know what that means, but
I mean, to be fair
right, there's no book called Kabbalah.
no,
Like,
no, no, no. I mean, well, the Zohar, I think, is
okay,
very
fine, yes,
Kabbalistic,
okay,
so they definitely have quoted the Zohar a lot in there. But hey, whatever works. Uh, listen, it's I don't know. I don't think it really it whatever speaks to you, whatever like helps you connect. I think that's amazing,
right,
and it's a start. But I definitely, just speaking from my own journey, like being an entrepreneur, I have never been more connected to God. I don't know how anyone could run a business and not believe in God. There's just been so many things where it's like, yeah, I'm working and being creative and coming up with all these strategies but it's so clearly God.
right,
It's never been more obvious to me in my life.
right. And again, obviously, I would say my perspective, our perspective is somewhat biased. Um, but again, I would definitely agree with the statement. Anyone who has their eyes open, it's hard not to see God in the world.
Yeah.
Um, and in terms of like these blockages that people have with maybe the specifics of certain religions, again, there could be obviously different people, different explanations. But a lot of it, I think, comes down to trauma either related to specific people who presented the religion to them or specific aspects of the religion that were presented to them in a wrong way. And again, I'm not an expert in how a person should overcome those
And
blockages
heal that.
or
Yeah.
can heal that, right? Overcome those challenges. But I really do believe that there's no person that's, oh, like, I can't do religion. Again, there's different levels and different stages of where a person could be. And unfortunately, sometimes it's presented the wrong way. But that doesn't mean that, it's something they can't overcome or something that people are always growing. One interesting, again, it was kind of presented in a humorous way by a friend of mine I went to high school with, who was a bit of a funny guy, but he was once basically expressing to one of our rabbis. He was saying he was basically saying, I don't want to be any more religious than I am, because he understood that being more religious comes with more restrictions, more rules, more expectations, and a life that maybe seems a life of piety does not seem to anyone as being fun.
Right.
So he was admitting that he does not want to be more religious than he is, but he said, I wish that I wanted to want.
Mm,
Meaning like I want to want. I wish that I was at a place where I wanted to be more religious. I don't want to be more religious,
yeah,
but I see the benefit in it, and I wish I wanted that.
that's funny.
Yeah,
That's what I say about like I've said that before about like I wish that I wanted to marry just for money, but I'm not that shallow, unfortunately.
right,
I see the benefits of it.
right,
I just I want more.
right,
Um, yeah, it's interesting. Religion's definitely interesting. I think words are super powerful, and I think just the word religion sometimes can spark things in someone based on their experiences. But I think during this episode, we really like unpacked the beauty and the value in it. So if the word religion scares you, you don't have to focus on the word, just focus on the journey and taking one step at a time because it doesn't have to be overnight. And I think the same way with God, like if you want to find him, you will. So if you want more meaning in your life, you'll find it.
right. And I think a lot of an important point is going back to what we were speaking of before, that a lot of the insecurities that people feel or the boxes they place themselves in is really in their own head or things that people created or placed in their head. It's not based in any sort of reality of what God is thinking about you or what God wants from you.
And another hard truth, someone said this to me before in multiple ways, but you're not that important. In other words, if you're so concerned on how people are perceiving you and how you're coming across and all these things and what are people going to think, you're not that important. I'm
Right.
sorry.
Actually, you were mentioning before we officially started talking on this podcast
Yeah.
about how you like to ask people for their favorite quote.
Yeah.
So again, I don't know if I have like a favorite quote. I have a number of favorite quotes,
Yeah.
but this is certainly one of my favorite quotes that I like to say, and I don't know who the originator of the quote was.
Wait, pause. Is this going to be your quote?
Sure.
Okay, so then hold on. I have a tradition. The whole basis of this podcast is based on this quote from Pirkei Avos, which is "Eze hu chacham, halo mikol adam," which means one who is wise is one who learns from everyone. And we have learned so much from you. So, yes, please share a quote. We're waiting.
Okay, so I will tell you one of my favorite quotes,
Mm-hmm.
and the reason why it is one of my favorite quotes is it really encapsulates so much of what we were talking about how every person really just has to find their own way
Mm-hmm.
and what works for them. Obviously, sometimes within a certain construct, but to not get too caught up in the fake boundaries that we've created for ourselves or that other people have created for us. And the quote, which I unfortunately do not know the original sayer of the quote,
I'll find it. Don't
um,
worry.
but the quote is that when I was in my 20s, I used to care about what people thought about me.
Mm-hmm.
When I got to my 40s, I stopped caring what people thought about me. And when I got to my 60s, I realized nobody was thinking about me.
At all.
Right.
It's true.
So it takes time to get there. Hopefully not until our 60s, because I don't think
Right.
either one of us are there yet.
Nope.
Um, but really,
Everyone's just so self-absorbed and not even necessarily in a negative way. We just have so much going on in our own lives
yeah,
that even if you talk about someone and it's a juicy piece of like, oh, what are they up to? It's maybe a 5-minute conversation, maybe.
right.
And then
And
you're not thinking about it.
especially in the modern world, the news cycle turns over so quickly
You're
that,
not losing sleep over
exactly.
anybody.
Right,
You're just not, you
right.
know?
Right. Unless you've been canceled, in which case, whatever.
Not yet. Haven't been canceled yet.
Right,
Um, no, that's so true. But yeah, you're not that important. But you are that important, but you're not that important.
right,
It's a balance.
right.
Yeah. So just do what's right for you. And something that I've definitely found in my journey in my life in all areas is that like when you're authentically you and you're authentically just trying to search and be genuine and you're not coming across trying to attack anybody, you're just looking for the most meaningful, purposeful life ever. A lot of wonderful people and opportunities will enter your life and you'll find your way.
Yeah, no, that's something it's also a piece of advice I often tell people, um, that you're going to be the most successful in life when you're just able to be you. When you're being
Hmm.
yourself, you're not going to be able to get through life, whether it's in a job or a relationship or anything. You will not be able to fake your way through it.
No, you
If
can't.
it's anything which is lasting and long term, you're either going to be miserable or you're going to fail,
Mm-hmm.
but you will not be successful being anyone but who you really are.
Yep.
I just found that it was, I think it was Hashem helped me to not get certain jobs that I thought I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And like a particular experience, there was before I have the job that I got the job that I have now. I interviewed at a certain school that did not end up offering me the job, and I was not happy they didn't offer me the job. But it was very clear upon reflecting that what made me unique and what makes me successful as a teacher, they didn't even like that about me,
Oh, so you would not have thrived.
right? It's like,
You would have felt bad about yourself
right,
long
like what
term.
makes me successful and like what my students love about me was something that this school didn't see value in.
Wow.
And if I would have worked there, I would have hated them and they would have hated me.
Yeah. And I think that's also really powerful to say too that you're not going to thrive in every situation in every environment.
Right,
And that's okay. But
right,
that's like them saying like if you take a fish out of water, is it the environment's fault or is it the fish's fault? You know?
right.
You got to put
I
yourself where you're going
actually,
to
I
thrive.
actually heard a really powerful quote about that recently, from a albeit unlikely source.
Okay.
I heard it quoted from 50 Cent, but it was powerful nonetheless.
Yeah.
He was saying that, let me get the quote correctly. He said, a bottle of water at the store costs $1. At the gym, it costs $2. At the airport, it's $4, and on the airplane, it costs $7.
Yep.
So he said, if a bottle of water can go from $1 to $7 just by changing location, if you're in a place where you're not being valued, it's not about you. You're just in the wrong place.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So there you have it. Wisdom from 50 Cent.
Such a I kind of low key want to just end like right there on that note. It's so true. And it's like I'll just say as someone like with my coffee, like when you have a product or for you like it's your teaching, right? Like it's really difficult sometimes to stay strong when you know your value, but you're not in an environment yet where people have seen it. But you have to believe that your people will come. Your environment will come. And it's just like not minimizing your shine to be in the
Right.
wrong space.
Right. For sure.
Mm, look at religion being relevant.
Okay. There you go. Again, I think it
Full
is
circle.
relevant.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot more I can say. I don't want to get into politics, but there's a lot more I can say on that. But I think it's relevant, and as much as people try to push it away, it will always come back because there's always going to be a reset. Like, wait, we need this in the world, and this
Yeah.
is still relevant. And even if it's not religion itself, it's the values that religion brings.
Yeah.
Um, we need them to live,
Yeah.
and that kind of makes sense because we're from God, and God kind of knows what we need,
Yeah. Literally.
right?
Right. So before we end, is there anything else that we haven't covered yet that you still would like to discuss? I just want to make sure
I
we didn't
think we
leave
touched
anything
it
out.
all.
Okay.
Looking back, I'm not really sure what we can say this episode was about. um, but
And to be fair,
but
everyone who knows me and has followed my journey, I have ADD, and
right,
this is very clear to
right.
see.
But whatever it is, I think we covered a lot of it.
We covered a lot of it, and it makes it interesting and dynamic when you're just having an authentic conversation. It's not scripted. I've found personally that I find a lot of value in podcasts like that. And I know other people do as well because it's not boring at all.
Right.
And also, even if it wasn't what we planned, if it's what was said, it was meant to be heard. Someone out there needed to hear this message.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on.
All right. Thank you for having me.
This is so fun.
This is such an interesting experience of having to be on a podcast.
Right?
Now when I listen to a podcast, I know what it's like to be on one. Kind of.
Literally.
Yeah.
No, for sure. And then you never know. Maybe you'll be at another one.
Okay. Maybe I'll make a podcast.
Yeah, now you'll do it. You'll be like, it's not that hard.
I can't do all this equipment, but still.
I could teach you. It's not
Yeah.
that hard. But yeah, thanks guys for listening or watching. If you are only listening to this, the video is on Spotify and YouTube, and I am trying to go my YouTube subscription, so help a girl out and subscribe. But thanks again for listening or watching, and I hope you have a great week. Let's get it. Let's go.